everyone, welcome back to the 8-Bit Guy. So I've got a little bit of a funny story for you on this one. About once a month, somebody emails me that they've got some kind of donation. And, my typical policy the last 2 or 3 years has been, I don't have any more room for any donations. So the answer is usually no. But every now and then, somebody will say, well, look, I've got this thing, and it's some kind of desirable thing, right? We're not talking about some piece of junk, right? Something that somebody would want. And they're like, look, I don't know what to do with this. So, David, if you don't want it, I'm going to give it to Goodwill. Or worse, throw it away, right? And so when somebody says something like that to me, I'm usually like, hold on. Okay, don't give it to Goodwill. Don't throw it away. If you really want to make sure it goes to a good home, you can send it to me. But the catch is, I'm not going to show it on the YouTube channel. And I'm not going to keep it. But I know a lot of people here in the Dallas area who are collectors of different things. I know a collector of TRS-80 stuff. I know a collector of Commodore stuff, Apple stuff, Amiga stuff, etc. And so depending on what it is, I'll just call up that person and say, hey, I got a new thing for your collection. And they usually come right over and pick it up. And so that's been my procedure on that sort of thing for a while. And so when Richard Blythe emailed me a kind of similar story about this VIC-20, it was the same conversation. So I told him, look, I'll find it at home if you'll send it to me. So there were a couple of thumbnail pictures in the email, which I did not click on because, I've seen a million VIC-20s or whatever. And, I just saw in the thumbnail, oh, yeah, that's a VIC-20. Now, if I'd bothered to click on the thumbnail and look at it a little closer, I would have realized, oh, this isn't an ordinary VIC-20. So when I pulled this thing out of the box, I was getting ready to call up a friend of mine to come pick this up. And then I got to looking at it and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't just any ordinary VIC-20. This is actually something that's been on my want list on my website. Actually, on the donation page is actually a place that said, I'm looking for a VIC-20 with PET keys. And well, by golly, here it is. So I wrote Richard an email back, said, hey, turns out change of plans. I'm not actually going to give this away. I'm going to do a restoration on it. And so that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. And so here it is. I was told this came from a storage closet at a radio station that was being cleaned out. Besides being dirty and yellowed, it's actually in really good condition. It also came with this data set, which for some bizarre reason has old crusty double-sided tape on the bottom. Oh, and there's a tape inside which has been labeled the all-new K-Life Talk Show Prompter Program. Use at your own discretion. We'll try that out later and see if it still loads. Let's compare this with my second generation VIC-20 so you can see some of the differences. The main thing that makes this unit unique is the style of keys as compared to the newer ones. Now, these are called PET-style keys because they resemble the key shape and font used on the Commodore PET computers. But also notice that the badges are very different as well, although some VIC-20s do have the older style badge but not the PET keyboard. Also, looking at the side, you'll notice that the power switch and power plug are different. The later VIC-20s use the same power plug as the C64. Speaking of that, I actually didn't have a first generation power supply, so I had to order one on eBay. And I don't even know if this one works either, but this particular model hardly ever failed since it just contains a basic step-down transformer. So I'm going to plug this thing in and find out if it works. So I flip the switch, and at first glance, it appears dead. However, I've worked on hundreds of VIC-20s, and I've learned to be patient on the first power-up. These old capacitors can come back to life once they're exposed to power again, but it can take a while. And 15 seconds later, after I was just about to give up, it came back to life. Not only is it working, but the picture and colors look really good. This actually looks better than my second generation models. So watch this. I'm going to power it off and then back on. And look at that, it only takes 2 seconds now as opposed to 15. So I started trying to type on it and I realized some of the keys aren't working. Okay, I take that back. Some of the keys aren't working very well. If you press them enough times, they seem to work. Indeed, it seems there are 5 or 6 keys that aren't working very well. I'll have to look into that. Well, I guess the next thing to do is attach this data set and see if it's working. The tape is moving and the computer is searching, but I let it run this way for about 5 minutes and it never found anything. So I stopped it, rewound the tape, and tried again. And on the second time, it found a program with no file name, and that's why it just says found. I've searched for K-Life Talk Show on Google, but I haven't come up with any great matches. I'm sure K-Life is an abbreviation of something, but I haven't figured out what just yet. And to my amazement, it did in fact finish loading the program without any errors. So let's start it up. Set time. I don't know if it's asking me a question or wanting me to type in the time. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try again and I'll put in the time. Countdown clock time. Okay, fascinating. I'm wondering if this was some sort of interface to the phone system or something. I can stop and list the program, and I'll have to look through this more carefully, and maybe by the end of the episode I'll have some answers. Okay, so now it's time to disassemble it so we can check out the inside and eventually get it cleaned up. I do not know why, but there is crusty double-sided tape around the feet on this thing. I'll have to deal with that later. Anyway, here's the inside, and I tell you what, I am kind of surprised how clean it is. I mean, this is one of the cleanest VIC-20 boards I've ever seen. I guess that's what happens when something is stored inside in a climate-controlled closet for 40 years. Anyway, let's go ahead and take the motherboard out. There we go. And let's take a close-up look. Keep in mind, I haven't even so much as dusted this off. It's amazing. So for a little fun, I thought I'd give you a comparison with a second-generation VIC-20 board. Now, besides the fact that most of the components are in a different place, you can see it has this metal plate on the bottom, and the most likely reason for this is so that the screw holes line up with the existing case mold. Anyway, here's the keyboard, and this is by far the most rare and unusual part of this particular VIC-20. Now, we'll come back to this shortly, but for the moment, I'm going to get this case ready to clean up. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a pain to get the LED out. And let's get to cleaning. And there we go. It cleaned up really nicely. All it needs now is some Retrobrite. But before we get to that, let's look at this data set. Now, I don't need to do a full restoration on this, as I already have one, but I want to at least clean it up. And this crusty double-sided tape is very annoying. I'm guessing somebody at some point wanted this thing to be attached to a desk or something. And there we go. It cleaned up pretty good, both top and bottom. The worst problem this thing has is all of the chemical burns from the cables that were pressed up against it for years on end. I could file those down a bit, but if I do, then the whiter plastic would show through and then I'd have to Retrobrite it too. Anyway, let's get started on the process. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and with any luck, I can complete this process in a single day. Today is very well suited for this. And there we go. We'll come back and check on it later. While that is going, let's have a look at this keyboard. It's really not all that dirty. In fact, it's mostly just dusty, so I'll start with some compressed air, and then I'll come back with a little brush to get all of the spots in between the keys. And, then I'll give it a spray down with Windex, and I'll do my best to work in between the keys. Well, here we go. This keyboard looks absolutely flawless, and all we have here is some Windex that hasn't evaporated yet. Well, even though it may look flawless, it doesn't work flawless, so I'm going to take it apart. And here we go. Interesting. The plungers look exactly like the ones used in the PET. And I guess that shouldn't be surprising, being the keyboard already resembled the PET anyway. However, what I'm afraid of is these may suffer the same problem as the PET. If you recall, several years ago I did a restoration on a PET, and the problem was the little pads were not conductive anymore, so I had to paint this special coating on them to make them work again. But I don't even have any of that stuff on hand. However, looking closely at these pads, they seem kind of dusty, and so does this PCB. So I think for the moment, I'm just going to use some alcohol and clean up the PCB real good, and then do the same for the little pads. And I guess I should test it, so I'll put in a few screws to hold everything in place, and then I'll just connect it to the motherboard. And well, to my relief and amazement, that actually fixed it. Every single key is now working properly. I'm going out to check on the Retrobrite, and since the temperature is 108 degrees today, I thought I'd try a little experiment. I've always wanted to do this. So the frying pan is 86 degrees at the moment, and I'll come back in a few minutes. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, it was up to 129. And a few hours later, at the hottest part of the day, I read 153 degrees, which is just 5 degrees short of the 158 degrees needed to cook an egg. But I thought I'd go ahead and give it a try anyway. Of course, it helps when I don't accidentally drop the egg. So let's try that again. Now, the reason I'm doing this is just to poke a little fun at the Europeans, specifically because when I showed the winter storm we had here back in 2021, there were literally hundreds of highly critical comments from people who live in colder climates who couldn't understand why we couldn't deal with what for them was just a normal winter day. And as I'm making this video, I see in the news how parts of Europe are crumbling under an intense heat wave. And I just wanted to point out that the temperature there isn't even as hot as it is here in Texas, which is what I would consider a normal summer day for us. And so the idea being, we're prepared for what's normal for us, and Europe is prepared for what's normal for them. I mean, people shouldn't be so judgmental. Anyway, back to my egg experiment. It really wasn't cooking, so I thought I'd scramble it up a bit. That's how I usually cook my eggs anyway. But interestingly enough, the temperature of the eggs was 107. That's way lower than I was expecting, and I think the reason is because the liquid is evaporating, and that's causing the surface to cool. It did eventually rise to 112, but never got anywhere near as hot as the pan was without the egg. Eventually it started to just dry up, and I think there was tiny spots of cooked egg, but this was just not going to work. Of course, I could have probably cooked it on the dash of my car, but I don't want to risk damaging my car's dash by placing a metal pan there. Anyway, aside from the egg, the Retrobrite process continues, and I can tell it has made progress. Anyway, we'll skip ahead to near sunset. Time to pull this thing out and rinse it off. And here it is. I'll dry it off, but I don't think it is done. No, it is definitely not done. It does look a lot better, but this is going to have to spend another day retrobriting. So I'm just a bit concerned with some minor splotches I'm seeing here, which I've never really seen when using submersion and peroxide before. So just to make sure that the surface is super clean, I'm going to give it a good scrub with baking soda. And then here we go with day number 2. Fast forward to the evening, I've got a bad feeling about this.
So, unfortunately, a second and even third day out in the sun failed to get rid of the last bit of yellowing on this computer. And, I just had this feeling that this restoration project had been going too easy. Like, everything was just working in my favor, and I figured something's got to go wrong. Well, this is it. So I've talked to some other people in the retrobriting community, and I've had some other people tell me that early VIC-20 cases can be very stubborn for retrobriting, and there must just be something different with the plastic. But anyway, bottom line is there may not be anything I can do about it.
The way I see it, there are 3 options going forward. The first option is to swap the case. So that sounds pretty simple since I do have some other VIC-20s, and the cases are actually identical. But in order to preserve this unit historically, I need to also remove and swap the badges, both on the top and the one on the bottom with the serial number. And I'm not saying I can't do that, but it is risky as I could wind up damaging those. So option number 2 would be to spray paint the case. I don't normally like spray paint for a computer because if you handle the computer a lot, the paint will eventually rub off or turn colors where the oils of your skin are left on it. But in the case of this computer, it's more or less going to be a museum piece that will rarely be used, so that could be an acceptable option. And of course, option number 3 would be to simply do nothing and leave it the way it is. The reality is, I know how the internet is, and no matter which option I choose, there will be some group of people that are angry no matter what path I choose. So, this is one of those situations where I might as well pick the option I prefer since I won't be able to make everyone happy regardless. So, I decided to try the paint option, and I found a color I think matches well. It's called Heirloom White.
And in fact, let's compare the lid to the VIC-20. Hey, yeah, I think that's a good match. But I'd really like to test it on something first. And I have the perfect thing. Remember when I went to the recycle shop in Oklahoma and I brought all of this stuff home? Well, I still have that box of old yellow VIC-20 case parts in storage. So I dug one out, and they're all very yellow and dirty like this, and most are missing keys. And here's the color it will be painted. Now I need to take the keyboard out, and of course I'll need to clean this thing up as well as the other system in order for the test to be accurate. And here it is. It took me about 20 minutes to get it cleaned up, and let's compare it with the one I'm restoring. Dang, it actually looks really good when compared to this one. Now I'll need to mask off these badges. If anything, this will be as much of a test to see if I can do this correctly as it is about the paint itself. And here we go with the paint. So, first coat was going on pretty nice, and I was very optimistic about it. However, I didn't film putting the second coat on, and that's where things went wrong. Okay, so I have good news and bad news. The good news is I think the color is perfect. I mean, of course, there's probably a range of different shades of colors when these things were new, so it's hard to say exactly what the color should have been. But the big problem is up here around these vents. If you look close, you'll see this really coarse texture. And I know exactly when this happened. I noticed that the vents were still looking very yellow down in the crevices. And so I pointed the can straight down like this in order to get more coverage there. And I guess that's a big amateur mistake to make. So the can started spitting out paint like this. Well, after that experiment, I found myself back at the 3 doors again, wondering if I was going down the right path. And after a while, I decided that I would just pick option 3. I mean, the computer works now, and while it may not look factory perfect, it is certainly a lot better than it was. So, let's just get it all reassembled. Okay, now that we're done, let's just compare how it looked before and how it looks now. I may revisit the spray paint idea in the future once I've gotten a little bit more practice in doing a proper job. I just don't feel I'm qualified at the moment to do this machine justice. And now for my favorite part about doing a restoration, final testing. I'll use the penultimate cartridge first. And of course I'll need to test it with a disk drive and a RAM expansion, so I'll play a little Pesky Robots. And while we're talking about games, I wanted to mention a number of new VIC-20 games have come out recently, such as Chucky Egg. And then there's this one, Get More Diamonds. And my personal favorite, although I'm not fond of the name and not even sure how to pronounce it, I think it's Help Bodge.
Okay, so I know many of you are curious about the radio station program, and I've spent some time looking at the program listing and playing around with it because, you know, I don't have a manual for this, obviously. And I think I've figured out kind of, sort of, how it works. So obviously you start it up and you're going to put in, like, the time. And the countdown clock time is a number of seconds before the talk show would be over. Now, I don't know, I'm just going to put in like 10,000 seconds or something like that. Okay, so this doesn't actually interface with the telephone system at all. The way this works is there would be somebody in a booth that's running the talk show, like actually doing the speaking. And then there would be another person outside of the sound booth who would have the VIC-20 and be answering calls. And then this monitor, there would either be 2 monitors, one big monitor, I don't know, but either way around, the person inside the booth would be able to see what's on this screen. And so basically the person taking calls would, they would type in, I don't know, I can't figure out if it's supposed to be like a name, like I could type in Frank Johnson, and then you have to pick a line number between 1 and 5, so I'll say 3. All right. So now it says Frank Johnson on line 3. Now, I suppose, you could do it another way around. You could say something like alien abduction. Like maybe there's somebody on line 2 saying they were abducted by an alien or something, right? It's a talk show, right? Anyway, and so I'll put that on line 2. And so, again, I'm not sure whether they were wanting names or kind of like little descriptions or whatever. But that's kind of the idea. And then they can clear these off. And that way the person inside the booth can answer whatever line they want, and they kind of know, what's waiting there for them. I noticed there's also instructions to do like commercial break warnings and stuff like that. And then you can push the pound key, and it will tell you like how many seconds are remaining on the show, I guess. And I can't remember how I'm supposed to get out of that. But anyway, you get the idea. So this is basically what it was used for back like 40 years ago.